Hey, what's up? This is TJ. Thank you for joining me. Today we're here with the Waldorf Iridium, and we're going to take a look at what might be the least understood part of the Iridium, and that is the Resonator Engine. We're going to take a look at 3 presets that I've made, and I'm going to deconstruct them for you so you get a better idea of how the Resonator Engine works. So let's get started. Now, the first question you should be asking is, what the heck is the Resonator Engine? Well, the Resonator Engine is based on the concept of physical modeling. Physical modeling uses mathematical algorithms to recreate the sound as it is created in the real world. Say, for example, if you play a string on a guitar, the physical modeling algorithm is going to try to recreate the pluck of your pick against the string of the guitar. Then it's going to try to recreate the sound of the string vibrating. And then it may try to recreate the sound of you fretting the note and the buzz that you may get from that, and then the body sound that is resonating within the whole concept of the sound of the guitar. Now, within the Iridium, I don't really think it's designed to actually recreate, real world sounds that way. It's more of a blank plate. It gives you the aspects of what, physical modeling does. So you can create, real world sounds if you can, and or you can create otherworldly sounds, I should say. And those are the things I think are really fun. Now, before I get into the deconstruction of the sounds that I'm presenting today, we should go through all the different parameters so you know what they do. There are 15 different parameters that are associated with the Resonator Engine. I'm going to quickly go through their names here and we'll go in depth with what they are. You have the number of repetitions, the spread, the timbre, the exciter, the Q. The Q is repeated up here, so that's an additional control for that. The Q curve, spectrum Q, the timbre mode, spread mode, high cut, stereo field, the FO boost, which is the fundamental boost. You have attack, decay, and acceleration. So those are all the different parameters. Let's go through those individually. Now, one of the most important ones here is the exciter. With the resonating engine, or Resonator Engine, the exciter is really the most important parameter in terms of what creates the initial sound. Here, let me give it a listen here. Now what you're hearing is as it gets higher in value, it actually gets a little bit longer. When it gets shorter in value, it gets a little bit more pluckier. So that's the exciter. Now the exciter is generally noise within the default of Iridium, or you can load samples here if you want to. You can add samples into there. So you can change the tone of the exciter within the Resonator Engine. The next thing that's most important is the number of repeats here. You can have up to 1 through 16 repeats of the exciter. So that's repeating 16 times. That's just 1 time. Set that to whatever your taste is for the given sound. And the repeats also have controls with them in terms of time that we're going to go through in a second in terms of the decay and the acceleration. But I'm going to leave it on the 16 for now. The next important function is the spread here. Now you'll see here, these are the different partials within the sound. If I change the spread, the partials get further away. If I come closer, they'll actually fold over. create some of my favorite sounds with this, the folding over with the spread. All right, and next we're going to be looking at the timbre. Now that takes the different partials and it changes the structure of them. Let me show you. So you see at lower settings it actually thins it out. At higher settings it'll create more partials. And now the next most important parameter is the Q. The Q is either here or up here. I want you to do it here so it's easier to see. Now the Q is the amount of resonance that goes within the individual partials. And basically it also has a tendency to shorten them up or make them longer. And the next thing we want to look at is the Q curve. Now the Q curve determines the performance, as they say, in the Iridium for the different resonance of the Q. So it's best to hear it. Now, depending on where the other settings are, it can be either a subtle or a more dramatic effect. Let's listen to the spectrum skew so you can get an idea what that does. So what you're seeing here is that with the spectrum skew, the more that I turn it up, there's less of the partials and more of the fundamental. If I turn it down, the reverse happens. Next, we're going to look at the different modes. The default mode is what's called peak mode. You have 5 different modes: the peak, the sine, the saw square, the sine saw, and the modulo. Let's listen to those. This is the peak, the sine, the saw square, the sine saw, and the modulo. Now again, how you change the other parameters can drastically affect how this will sound. Let's go back to the peak. All right, there's 2 different spread modes. There's the stretch and the stiffness. Now basically the difference between those is how it affects the sound when you're using the spread. For example, in the stretch mode, you'll remember that affects the distance of the partials together. If you put it in the stiffest, the difference in the spread is much more, I would say, exponentially different in terms of the amount of spread you can get from a wider perspective and or a narrower perspective. So you see when it's fully down here, the fold over is wider as opposed to with the stretch mode, the fold over is much more narrow. Conversely, if I take the spread all the way out, in the stretch mode, it's much more wider apart. In the stiffness mode, it's much more closest together. So let's put that back to default of the stretch and turn that back to the center. And here you just have a high cut. Set that to your taste. This is the width of the stereo field. And this is the fundamental boost. Now, this is an important parameter, particularly within the iridium and the quantum, because one thing about the Resonator Engine, it tends to be the most quiet of all the 5 different engines in there. So sometimes, in order to get a nice sound when you're blending it with the other engines, it's helpful to increase the fundamental. Okay, so let's talk about these very important parameters. You have the attack, the decay, and the acceleration. All right, now these have to do with the way the different exciters, those repeating notes, those repeating sounds that came from the amount of repetitions that we had done, how they sound individually. They can have their own attack. When you set the attack to a higher amount, they'll tend to more blend together. To a lower amount, they'll have a more faster attack and a more plucky sound. Now the decay, turn that up. So it's the same thing, but on the end of the sound. And the most important parameter of all these things is the acceleration. If we turn the acceleration all the way up, it's going to speed up the number of repeats. However, if we turn it all the way down and turn the decay down so you hear it a little bit better, you'll hear the repeats are slowing over time. Conversely, if I turn it up, now they speed up over time. All right, so those are all the 15 parameters that are within the Iridium's Resonator Engine. All right, let's do some deconstruction. The first one we're going to work on is the pad sound that you heard at the beginning of the video. I'm calling it Resophonic. All right, with the Resophonic preset, what I've done is I have the resonator on all 3 of the oscillators with different settings. So they're all additive together to make one given sound. And this will be the same with the other 2 presets that I'm going to show you today. Let's take a look at the first one. So I'm going to isolate that out. I'll turn the other 2 off and we'll hear it. So that has a nice slow attack associated with it. It has a long Q, a very short Q curve, moderate skew in terms of that. You see the stiffness, though, is the stiffer spread, and the timbre mode is the sine. So this is a very, very simple, basic sound. It has a long attack, a long decay, and a long acceleration. So even though the repetitions are 16, you don't really hear them being as defined because of the attack and decay. Let's take a look at the next Resonator engine on oscillator number 2. Okay, you'll see here, this is the modulo timbre, and the stiffness is still the same with the spread mode. Okay, again, it has a long Q and a long Q curve this time instead of the shorter one. And it has a longer spectrum skew. Very short attack, shorter decay, and a moderate acceleration. Let's listen to that. So with that, you can hear the repetitions. Here there are 8 repetitions. Okay, let's take a look at the third oscillator. Here you'll see it is in the stretch mode of the spread mode. Okay, and it's folded over in the sine timbre mode. Again, a long Q, longer Q curve, very short skew. That's how you get that fold over. Okay, short attack, short decay, and a reverse acceleration. So we hear all these together. So now you hear all those together, and you can hear how they're additive to the sound. Now here, I've stripped out all of the effects. There's no effects from the original version that you heard at the beginning of the video, and I stripped out the filters. There's no filter effect. So let's add those back in. I'm going to bring back the version of this that does have that. So we'll go over here. There we are. And playing it with the filters and the effects. So you'll see here with the effects, we have chorus, delay, and reverb. Pretty basic. And then with the filters, we have the dual filters running in twin peaks at 12 dB. And then we have the digital former in a comb filter. Now there are also some modifications in the mod matrix that are affecting the given oscillators. LFO1 is the timbre of oscillator 2. Okay, so that's over here. That's in the center one. LFO2 is affecting the spread of oscillator 1. And then an envelope is affecting the Q on oscillator 2. And then, just for a little bit more fun, the LFO3 is affecting the comb filter that is in the digital former. So when you combine all those things in the different resonator engines, add them up with all the different oscillators, you can really create a full sound. Now the next sound that we're going to deconstruct is a sound that has a pluck in the beginning, and then with the sustain, and it's kind of a glassy sound. I'm calling it resolved. Let's look at this resolved preset, okay? First, let's turn on all of the different 3 oscillators that are on the Resonator engine. Remember, this one doesn't have any effects or filters associated with it. This version is just the oscillator. So let's listen to that. Let's listen to oscillator 1 just by itself, okay? And you'll see here the Q is turned up pretty well. The Q curve is right in the middle. Okay. The timbre mode is the saw square. It is in the stretch spread mode. Okay. And the number of repeats that you have is the full 16. The attack is quick. The decay is moderate. And the acceleration is just off the center line. Moving on to the next oscillator, that Resonator engine. So that's really just creating kind of a pluck type sound, a percussive sound. but it still has the repeats there. It has 8 repeats. And let's move on to the third. Okay, you'll see here the temper mode is the peak mode. It's stretched, but it's folded over with the spread. Now that's just creating a slight sound. I'm going to turn that up just to give it a little bit of color on the attack. So that's just giving it a little bit more of an attack type sound. Let me turn it down overall, and I'll add both those 2 oscillators back in. So those are all 3 oscillators just with the oscillator sounds by themselves, no filters, no effects. So let's add the filter and effects back in. I'll go to that version of this preset. All right, here we go. Obviously a big difference with effects. Let's see what we've got going on here. I've got a compressor to kind of mellow it out in terms of the overall level, a phaser, a delay, and a reverb. In terms of the filters, well, for the former, we have again the comb filter, and we have the escaping dual filters. And there are some modifications here. Okay, you'll see that the envelope is affecting the spread for resonator number 3. Another envelope is affecting the filter pans, okay, for both those so that you get a wider effect as you hear the note. And then you have a number of LFOs here that are affecting the exciter on resonator 2, the Q on resonator 1, the timbre on resonator 1, the Q on resonator 3, and the timbre on resonator 1. And LFO 2 is modulating the delay time. All right, the next sound is called resolutions. There's kind of a theme going on here. This is a fast attack, fast release, bright sound that's great for sequences and arpeggiations. On this resolutions preset, we're going to run through that real quick here. First thing I should make note of is that it is actually in unison mode with 3 different voices running at the same time. So you can see them running here. All right, let's break it down. Let's go to the first one. Now, one thing I haven't talked about much in the other 2 presets I should mention here is the exciter. As again, the exciter is the noise portion of the preset. Here it's set to a moderate amount. All right, you have the Q set in the middle, Q curve down towards the lower end. It is on the peak mode, stretched, short attack, short decay. There is no plus or minus of acceleration, and it does have the maximum amount of repetitions. Now, you're not really hearing the repetitions because it is running through the sequencer, or I should say the arpeggiator, so you're just getting a re-trigger very, very quickly. Let's hear the next one. Second oscillator, very, very short. It is the sine saw, so it should be a very, very basic type of sound. Short attack, short decay, and the acceleration is actually increased because it is on the left side of the center line. Okay, moving on to the third. Okay, this is the sine. It is in stretch mode, longer Q, longer Q curve. Again, a quick attack and decay. There is no plus or minus on the acceleration in terms of the exciter. That is actually very high. Okay, let's combine all those oscillators together to create one great sound. There you go. Now let's add back in the effects and the filter. So we're going to bring that back here. Here it is with the effects and the filter. Obviously a big difference there. Let's take a look at the effects. Again, I put the compressor on to even out the overall volume, chorus, and reverb. And in terms of modifications, okay, very, very simple modifications here. We have LFOs running the Q on number 2 oscillator here. LFO also on the timbre of 1 and 2. LFO on the Q of oscillator number 3. LFO on the timbre of oscillator number 3. And the filter is being LFO'd with the resonance and the cutoff. And that's it. Let's look at the filters. Okay, we have the filters running in opposition to each other. And the reason why I've done that is because you'll see the first filter is a low-pass filter, and then the second filter is a high-pass filter. So they're actually sweeping across each other, creating, you know, a bandpass type of effect. And the former is just a little bit of drive to give it a little bit of color. Well, that's it. Just a quick rundown of the Resonator Engine within the Waldorf Iridium and also the Waldorf Quantum. If you like the videos that I'm doing here, your support is very much appreciated. All you need to do is share the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Check out tjontheroad.com for more. I'll see you next time.